You know what I'm most nervous about this afternoon? Is that Derek Belays is convinced I can't say good morning in 20 minutes. And I hope to prove him wrong. It's nice to be here this afternoon. Winston Churchill said this: history is just one darn thing after another. Now, Winston did not say the word darn. And if I were presenting this in another place, I wouldn't either. Because I'm an advocate for the occasional cuss word. It drives my wife crazy. I personally think it's cleansing and healthy just to sometimes let rip with a good cuss word. This might be the antithesis of the presentation that we just heard. But for you all, we're just going to stick with the word darn, okay? And well, one darn thing after another kept happening to me. And before I knew it, Sunday before last was my 42nd anniversary as pastor of Lost Creek United Methodist Church in Stillwater, Oklahoma. That, I understand that seems to be something of a record. Unfortunately, there's no way to report that statistic and still come out as a young man at the end. And for the record, if you want to do some math, I just turned 22. And I was beginning my graduate education at Oklahoma State University when I was appointed by Dr. Lester Meyer, who was then the Stillwater District Superintendent. Now, the world has changed since 1976 when Dr. Meyer said, "I'm willing to take the chance if you are." And in reply, I said to him, "Sure, why not?" And thankfully, I give thanks that the Holy Spirit prevented me from speaking what it was my very next conscious thought. How hard could it be? I undoubtedly have the most spiritual goosebumpy call to ministry ever recorded. And it turns out, though, that this crazy job that we all share is harder than I first thought. And if research is to be believed, it is likely that several of us, even in this room, won't survive a 42-year tenure anywhere, much less in the same church. And those of us who do survive, a lot of us won't be all that healthy at the end. I'm certainly not claiming to be the greatest pastor of all time. I'd give myself a mid to high C maybe. Lost Creek is not the perfect church by any stretch of the imagination, but I can say to you without reservation, I am a healthy pastor of a healthy church. Love covers a multitude of sins, and health masks many imperfections. Invest at least as much energy in the maintenance of your health and the health of the culture of your church as you invest in the developmental details of programs and ministries. So, my task this afternoon, I've been asked to focus on a few things that I have done conscientiously and consistently for a long, long time now. And I don't know how unique they are to me, but in my mind and in my spirit, they're important. And I know they have made all the difference. And I truly believe that they are important, whether you are pastoring a congregation for 4 years or 40. Like I said, I understand that's why I was asked to talk today, to address some of those things that I do to foster health for myself and the church. In the invitation, there were some suggested questions that I might consider as my thought starters, and one of them really needs to be addressed really clearly up front. And the question was asked to me, have you ever thought of leaving? Well, let me answer that very clearly. Yes. And if I were doing this presentation somewhere else, I would have given you a 2-word answer, if you know what I mean. Almost every darn week for 42 years. And sometimes multiple times a week. Well, back to the beginning, that phrase, I'm willing to take the chance if you are. That is the phrase of my calling. I take that as my mantra, if you will. Little did I know then how often that particular statement would pass through my mind over the ensuing years. I did have opportunity. I did take the opportunity to actually write a letter to Dr. Meyer as he neared the end of his life and express my appreciation for taking that chance that day. Taking a chance. I've learned God loves a gambler. And what is there to lose in this game? You see, the gist of my talk this afternoon is cussing and gambling as related to pastoral health. I fully recognize that my appointment has been one 4-decade-long procedural mistake on the part of the Oklahoma Conference. But I like to think it's a mistake that's worked out fairly well for all involved. Leading me to this, it's important for us to learn to value our excellent mistakes. That's what I'd ask you to think about. Why do we fear mistakes so much? Why do we fear mistakes? There's a story. My favorite version of the story is found in Matthew 25, and we call it the parable of the talents. And the story isn't about the grand successes of the first two servants. The story is about that third servant. We're given more information about him than anything else in the story. And one of the things we are to learn from his response to his generous master is said in his own words, "I was afraid." Fear is our greatest enemy. Fear will stop us dead in our tracks. In the culture of Lost Creek, we openly acknowledge our mistakes because we make so many of them. We celebrate them, and it's often said out loud in so many ways. Remember, we don't shoot the wounded. Just pick up and go on. Get out there today. Try something. Make a mistake. Make it a dumb one. Make it a big one, and learn something from it. And by the way, when you've been in the same church for 42 years, every mistake you've ever made continues to live on and haunts you. There's another gem of conventional wisdom that says, don't reinvent the wheel. I would ask, why not? What's so sacred about a wheel? The only way you can know whether you might invent a better wheel is to actually try to reinvent it. One of the critical attitudes that I've learned has been to make friends with change. There's a whole lot of force to keep things the way they are. Make friends with change. And one of the critical skills that I've learned has been to embrace change, to guide change, to promote change, and to reinvent a few wheels along the way. Change never stops, whether we like it or not. Churchill again. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. I don't often volunteer the information about my pastoral tenure. That information tends to be a conversation stopper anywhere I go. And if it happens to be discovered by a United Methodist, clergy, or layperson, well, let me tell you, they stop breathing. Their eyes bulge out. Their faces turn red. Their heads spin. And once they regain their composure, they always look at me with this sheepish grin, and I can read their minds. And some of them will dare to even voice the question, what dirt do I have on the bishop? And they wonder exactly what kind of clever scam I have been able to pull off on this thing called the itineracy. Some will even ask or even say, well, if they'd leave me in the same place for 40 years, I could blah, blah, blah. Well, here's the scoop. It isn't about the tenure, because I haven't kept going back to the same church doing the same job for 42 years. From my point of view, you may or may not believe it, but from my point of view, I've actually itinerated 5 times over my career. It's just that I never moved to do that. First, when I came, and then as the congregation shifted in attendance of about 40, and then another shift that was required at about 75, and another shift about 120. And then when we reached our present stage, starting at about 175 and moving into the 200 range, another shift that's happened most recently. Each of those 5 transitions required a complete reinvention of myself, a redefining of my role in the congregation, a changing of the leadership structure and our internal procedures, and even congregational identity along the way. And that takes an enormous amount of creative hard work and energy. For example, in 1976, Lost Creek was a band of 4 or 5 very blue-collar households consisting of 10 to 15 people. Only one of those adults had ever attended college. Today, at least 20% of our adult population over the age of 25 has at least a master's degree or higher. And our current household income is far different than low-end blue-collar. That has been a critical change of our community identity that took place over the course of a decade or so. You know, there's another story. You can read it in the 11th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, and it's a pretty interesting scene. I picture it, Jesus alone on a high hill, overlooking a string of distant towns and cities, including Jerusalem, because that's the way the old picture that hangs in our churches depicts it. We get the impression that he could look out and see them all, even though I doubt that that's physically possible. That scene is set in Matthew's Gospel about midpoint in his journey, and it's a heart-wrenching gut check by Jesus. He looks out over those places where most of his work had been done up until that point, where he had been drawing the largest crowds. And he said to them, as though they could hear him, "You all can go to hell." No, I'm just working in another opportunity to cuss. It's really in there. You can look it up. And it kind of stops me in my tracks when I read that story and encounter Jesus saying something like that, because that's not my primary image of the Savior. In this very dark and frustrated mood, Jesus begins to pray, to really honestly pray. And he admits that at that particular moment, even he isn't all that sure exactly what God has planned. Things certainly don't seem to be working out as he had expected. And in that time of prayer, Jesus took hold and reinvented the wheel. Oh, why didn't I type in there, Jesus, take the wheel? Man, I wish I'd said that. You know, the redemption of all humankind and the transformation of the world, that's a pretty big wheel to monkey with, right? But he does. And as that time of prayer progresses and winds down, you find Jesus recommitting himself to the task at hand. He redefines who he will choose to be from that point on. I get the sense that at the beginning of that scene, he was on the verge of walking away, and he regains a clearer understanding of his strategies. He sets aside what hasn't worked, and he recommits himself to everything that has. Where he goes and who he engages and how he works changes from that scene on in Matthew's Gospel. And at the end of it all, he takes a deep breath and he calls us with one of the most beautiful invitations in the Scriptures. Come to me, all of you who are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. What a journey of reinvention from where Jesus starts to where he winds up. And you know, one of the reasons that I think that invitation so reaches us and touches us today when we are bone-tired, discouraged, and weary, well, it's because when he said it, Jesus was bone-tired, discouraged, and weary too. There is a word that I have found for the antidote to the pressing downpull of the pile of all the cares and problems of the world, and it's the word priority. Priority is not just deciding to do the things that you want to do. Priority is not everything that's written down in your calendar. Many of us use our calendars to document the chaos of our lives. You cannot have 20 priorities. You can't have 12 priorities. You can only have 1 or 2 or 3 priorities. And by the way, you can't have 3 priorities for church, 3 more for family, and 3 more for your community, and then throw in 3 more while you're at it for yourself. You can only have a few priorities. And here's the really, really good news about priorities. You get to pick them. Other people may try to convince you that they can choose your priorities for you. You get to pick your priorities. Other people can't pick them for you. Problems pile up inside every church, really, really big problems. And they tend to fall under 3 basic categories I've discovered, regardless of the size of the church, from the largest to the smallest. There's not enough space, not enough people, and not enough money. I think we all share those 3 problems. And those 3 problems are never going away. And at the same time, they can generate a whole mountain full of other problems that are going to rise up and try to convince you that they're really, really important problems. Why is it that pastors feel like that we have to take on and solve and carry all the problems of the world? If we can't solve them, at least we can carry them. Well, it's because we care so much. And because somewhere we have gotten it into our brains that a really good church or a really good pastor, a successful church or a successful pastor or a healthy church or a healthy pastor has few or no problems. Oh, and likely sometimes or another there's somebody screaming in your ear going, "This is really a problem and you have to do something about it." There's those people too. Don't let that eat into your priorities. Here's the good news. When you operate with priorities ordered and in mind, then you get to pick which problems to focus on. And believe you me, tackling a problem from the viewpoint of health offers a vastly greater array of possible solutions than tackling a problem from a standpoint of ill health or decline. But what do you do with all those other problems that don't fit in your priorities? Well, if there's time or energy and wisdom left after your priorities are handled, you might take on a few of them. But here's the really, really good news. You know what you do with them? You ignore them. Because here's a revelation. There are a lot of problems that try to convince us that they're really, really, really important problems and demand a whole lot of our energy and time that fall under this category, that when you actually give them your attention and effort and energy and time and you actually try to solve them, you only make them worse. Some problems are best solved by just ignoring them, and they go away, and you're still alive, and you're still healthy. And the only way you're going to discern which problem is which kind is by having clear priority outlined in your life. One of the most valuable words you can learn in maintaining priority is no. Control what you can control and let what you can't control run its course. Here are a few of my critical priorities if you want to know and be curious. Getting people to church. Not one of my priorities at all. I have no control over their choices to attend or not to attend, and most of them are going to choose not to attend. But engaging people is my priority because I have a great deal of control over the engagement of those who attend. Another priority, I invest most of my non-worship-oriented time and energy in developing, training, and empowering lay leadership for a multitude of tasks and not just our administrative committee work. I'm constantly on the lookout for new leadership to mine and develop and allowing them to make some excellent mistakes, by the way, along the way. Can I just tell you, for example, the chair of our board of trustees, he's 30 years old and he's attended Lost Creek for 3 years. The current chair of our staff parish relations committee, she's 31 years old. And she has attended Lost Creek since she was a teenager. So let's go back then to that story where we started. No one ever reads the parable of the talents and says, you know what? I'm aiming for that third servant. He's careful. He is conservative. He was just a guy who played it safe. We don't even aim for the middle guy, even though he did a stellar job. We aim for that 5-talent servant. We want to be him. We don't want to be good servants. We want to be excellent servants. And excellence is never accidental. You might accidentally reach mediocrity, and occasionally you might even accidentally succeed. But excellence always happens on purpose. Secondly, excellence is costly. It costs us in every way. It costs us financially. It costs us of our time and our energy. Excellence is never same. Excellence is always change. Excellence has a very short shelf life. Excellence is never found in doing something the way it has always been done. And if you're thinking you began something excellently 5 or 10 years ago and it's still being done in just the same way by just the same old people, I can promise you it's no longer excellent, and it's time for you to reinvent that wheel. Because excellence will occur with healthy people in a healthy environment that encourages, accepts, and manages change well. Thank you.